Thank you. Thank you so much, Andre. I am so glad and grateful to IPREC for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen, please. All right. This is an overused but helpful expression as we kickstart the second seminar hosted by IPREC. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And today what I'm going to do is take you back about 8 years and walk with you until 2021, stopping along the way to visit various landmarks in the encryption and exceptional access landscape. Most journeys begin with a map. We'll start with a picture. I've chosen this one. It's a game of tug of war, where the rope everyone is pulling on is security. 2013, as we all know, is a watershed moment. Edward Snowden revealed to the world that the NSA had been engaged in mass surveillance of internet traffic on a global scale. This awareness greatly accelerated the adoption of encryption across the internet. There are some examples for you to see on the screen, but it's hard to believe today that TLS was an option, not the default, for sending your emails through your email service provider, and that encryption was not auto-enabled on smartphones. At this time, we also saw an initial increase in the use of end-to-end encrypted messaging apps. In May 2014, the Internet Engineering Task Force, or the IETF, published RFC 7258, expressing the consensus of the community that pervasive monitoring is a technical attack that should be mitigated in the design of IETF protocols where possible. It also made it clear that an attack is an attack, regardless of motivation. And later that same year, the Internet Architecture Board also issued a statement on internet confidentiality, which specified that encryption should be the norm for internet traffic. The IAB urged developers to include encryption in their implementations and to make them encrypted by default. This statement was endorsed by the Internet Society Board of Trustees. This is also the year where we see the rise of the growing dark argument. The then FBI director, James Comey, described it as, "We have the legal authority to intercept and access communications and information, but we often lack the technical ability to do so." So this so-called growing dark argument was countered by, "That's because you've been staring at the sun." The point being that law enforcement in the digital era had unprecedented access to information, including open source intelligence, social media interactions, communications metadata, and often access to very sophisticated traffic and data analysis tools. In 2014 and 15, some people started talking about needing keys or some other backdoor for law enforcement. And of course, this is not the first time that we're hearing about it. However, given the renewed interest in the idea, a group of distinguished computer scientists and cryptographers came together and published a seminal paper, Keys Under Doormats, mandating insecurity by requiring government access to all data and communications. The paper concluded that access will open doors through which criminals and malicious nation states can attack the very individuals law enforcement seeks to defend. More technical voices, such as the W3C Technical Advisory Group, as well as the Anti-Abuse Working Group, added their support to the paper, to end-to-end encryption, and to the dangers of pursuing exceptional access. The Secure the Internet initiative was also launched. An open letter was written to governments asking them to support encryption and to reject policies that would prevent or undermine the use of strong encryption. It sets out 5 clear principles which are on the screen. This letter is endorsed by the Internet Society and a number of our chapters, including the Brazilian chapter. In 2016, something that had been happening in the background comes forward as an alternative: government hacking. In a joint statement, ENISA and Europol recognized that solutions that intentionally weaken technical protection mechanisms to support law enforcement intrinsically weaken the protection against criminals as well, and proposed collecting and sharing best practices to circumvent encryption that are already in use. One way of circumventing encryption is by government hacking, which is undertaken by governments themselves or by commercial hacking companies such as Celebrite and Grayshift. Of course, one of the many dangers associated with government hacking is that exploits and hacking techniques could be stolen and used by criminals. I'm sure you've all heard of Eternal Blue, originally a zero-day exploit held by the NSA, which was used for the WannaCry and Petya Not Petya ransomware attacks. And then, of course, there's the infamous Apple versus FBI case, where Apple was asked to make a new version of the iPhone operating system, or the iPhone OS, circumventing several important security features and install it on the iPhone in question, a different type of backdoor, a kind of master key. In the end, the case was withdrawn as the FBI reported that a third party had assisted them in unlocking the phone. And 5 years later, in 2021, we learned that it was Azimuth Security, a small security company based in Australia. At this point, we'll just take a small moment to pause to examine some further developments in the adoption and use of encryption. Let's Encrypt, a free, automated, and open certificate authority operated for the public benefit, was launched in late 2015. It provides TLS certificates to more than 260 million websites. And in the last 4 years, the global HTTPS page loads have grown from 39% to over 80%. Also, WhatsApp turned on end-to-end encryption by default, and Apple introduced USB restricted mode. In 2017, as encryption is becoming more pervasive, we start to see new vocabulary emerge from the FBI. It also becomes clearer that the focus for law enforcement is end-to-end encryption, user-controlled encryption, and encryption turned on by default. US Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein coined the controversial phrase responsible encryption at this moment. At this point, also let's pause and reflect on what we mean by the default. Is encryption turned on or not? And why the default matters? Users, as we know, are notorious for defaulting to the default. And if we want to protect users and their data, encryption should be on by default, not offered as an optional extra, which they then need to find and turn on. And compare these two cases on your screen, one where privacy protection was on and one where it could be turned on. Moving ahead to 2018, we see the rise in technical capability notices, with Australia following the UK and a coordinated policy approach among the 5 countries' intelligence alliance. In a communique, the 5 countries' intelligence alliance said they have no interest or intention to weaken encryption mechanisms. But at the same time, they were encouraging ICT providers to voluntarily provide access. And if the ICT providers didn't, then the alliance said that they might pursue technological, enforcement, legislative, or other measures to make that happen. The UK was the first country with technical capability notices, but shortly followed by Australia, which had received the bulk of attention regarding its new TOLA law. In simple terms, a technical capability notice is a notice requiring a service provider to have the technical means to hand over unencrypted content when needed by law enforcement. As far as we know, but we may not know, these powers have not been used yet. The legislation in Australia received a lot of criticism from cryptographers and security experts because of the dangers to security, but also from the security industry about the impact that it would have on them. Some of those issues are the challenges of legal uncertainty, the impact on customers' buying decisions, diminished trust in security products, and consequences for tech export markets, jobs, and innovation in the security industry. A couple of months ago, the Internet Society released a report undertaken by Law and Economics Consulting Services, examining the potential economic impact of the Australian law. The researchers found that the biggest threat TOLA poses is to trust in digital services, including the internet. One business estimated that the cost of the law in terms of damage to trust in its brand could be as big as 1 billion Australian dollars in current and forecast sales. The US has also tried to achieve the same outcome using existing laws, namely through the All Writs Act. Moving forward to 2019, we now have ghosts, terrorists, children, intermediary liability in the mix. In India, where I come from, proposed changes to its intermediary liability rules that would make intermediary immunity from liability conditional on satisfying certain requirements, such as monitoring content and providing message traceability. The response from computer security and cryptography experts was that this would limit the use of end-to-end encryption and encourage others to weaken existing security measures. A major concern for India was the spread of misinformation across WhatsApp, a popular end-to-end encrypted messaging service used by an estimated 400 million users in the country at that point of time. It's also relevant to note that Facebook signaled it was going to extend end-to-end encryption across its services. The UK Government Communications Headquarters, or the GCHQ, proposed the idea of adding a ghost user to end-to-end encrypted communications, or in other words, a covert and silent observer. The response from security experts, tech companies, civil society, and others was to urge the GCHQ and anyone else contemplating the same idea to abandon the proposal. In summary, their concern was that it would introduce potential unintentional vulnerabilities and increased risks that communication systems could be abused or misused, and mean that users could not trust that their communications were secure. Post the Christchurch terrorist attack, the G7 interior ministers of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US issued a statement encouraging internet companies to provide lawful access solutions. Here, the reasoning was to combat the use of the internet for terrorism and violent extremist purposes. In July 2019, we see US Attorney General Barr emphasized that he was not pursuing services used by large enterprises or the government, but rather encryption marketed to consumers. This is a particularly disturbing position, as citizens in a democracy have a fundamental right to privacy. And yet, in 2017, we see that the US Senate approved Signal for staff use. And in 2020, the European Commission instructed staff to switch to Signal. Officials also use so-called consumer messaging apps and consider how many businesses rely on WhatsApp. Another reason given for backdoor access and to discourage Facebook from implementing end-to-end encryption across its services was concerns about the spread of child exploitation material on the internet. The response from security researchers and others was that this would endanger the security and privacy of billions of internet users across the world. We look across to Kazakhstan. There, the government tried to introduce the ability to decrypt HTTPS traffic by getting users to install a root certificate, or a classic machine in the middle attack. Major browsers concerned about the risk to security responded by banning or invalidating those certificates. And now on to 2020. In the US, there was a proposed law focused on the goal of protecting children, known as the Earn It Act, which would require internet intermediaries such as social media platforms and messaging apps to earn Section 230 immunity from liability. If such a law were to go ahead, companies may feel compelled, directly or indirectly, to build in exceptional access mechanisms such as backdoors, deploy weaker encryption, or not to deploy end-to-end encryption at all, making everyone in society more vulnerable to privacy, cybersecurity, and other risks. Signal, which is an end-to-end messaging app recommended for the use by US and EU officials, as we heard earlier, signaled that it would leave the US market if the Earn It Act passes. Alongside, we also see that the FBI continues its call for tech companies to have the technical capability to provide access to the content of encrypted data. In October 2020, the United States, the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Japan, India issued a statement in support of strong encryption, but called for technology companies to enable law enforcement access to content in a readable and usable format, where an authorization is lawfully issued, is necessary and proportionate, and is subject to strong safeguards and oversight. Important safeguards, sure, but processes do not fix security vulnerabilities. I haven't mentioned Brazil yet, but all of you will know that some years ago, there was a flurry of cases where ISPs were ordered to block WhatsApp because Facebook failed to hand over decrypted data. 2 cases are still pending in the Supreme Court. And then in the draft disinformation bill, the idea of traceability is under discussion with large public opposition in 2020. The Internet Society Brazil chapter led a strong response against the bill, and you all, of course, sitting here are the experts. In late 2020 and early 2021, the European Union joined the push for exceptional access, indicating through various documents that it would be pursuing policy and legislative solutions. Our Portuguese chapter at that point of time led an open letter response in April, highlighting the dangers of weakening encryption, undermining public confidence, and the potential consequences for an economy which is based on digital transactions. After a couple of years of mulling over their rules, India released its new intermediary rules with what they call a due diligence approach to liability, and a requirement that significant messaging services must be able to identify the first originator of a message. These rules are a subject of a number of court challenges at the moment. My colleagues at Internet Society also engaged in a comparative analysis of the traceability proposals in India and Brazil, which was very recently published by ObCrypto. And then here's an idea that bad ideas, here's an example that bad ideas never really go away. The mandated machine in the middle approach in Kazakhstan. This year, Mauritius floated the very same idea to be able to segregate and decrypt all social media traffic. And yet another bad example of a bad idea coming forward again, key escrow. So just as Brazil tried the approach of blocking WhatsApp, so did Russia for Telegram. Most recently, the UK released a draft online safety bill, which applies a duty of care approach. There are serious concerns that encryption, especially end-to-end encryption, may be incompatible with the bill's requirements. As my colleague said in a blog post that was published by the Internet Society last year, there's no duty of care without strong encryption. The bill is currently under public consultation. And of course, we saw the news of Operation Ironside, where law enforcement put insecure, compromised devices in the hands of criminals. In principle, the same approach was taken by Crypto AG, though in that case, the target was not criminals, but rather other governments. So let's take a moment to remind ourselves how the landscape has evolved since 2013. First, we saw proponents of exceptional access asking for the equivalent of a hotel master key. Then, no, I want you, which is a service provider, to have the key. And then, I don't care how you do it, just give me the access. At the same time, security agencies and some law enforcement agencies were pursuing a path of hacking into devices and services. Then they said, I don't want to break encryption. And don't worry, they're only consumer products. Then there was the ask, I want to trace where the message came from, to deal with viral misinformation on messaging apps, and the idea of adding a ghost user to those same apps to be able to listen to terrorists and other bad actors. There are also moves towards, if you don't do X, you will lose your immunity from liability, which could drive companies to engage in message screening before encryption. Where we began this journey in 2013, we used to have crypto battles. We are now in the midst of a crypto war, which is fast becoming a dangerously permanent feature of internet architecture debates. Before I close, I also want to take a moment to draw your attention to a campaign that the Global Encryption Coalition is leading to make the switch to strong encryption. It'll culminate on October 21st, which we're celebrating as the Global Encryption Day. I hope that this address is able to inform the upcoming debates in the seminar. I'm very, very sorry that I'm not going to be able to join the discussion after this, but I'm so glad and so grateful that I had an opportunity to speak with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I believe it was, well, for all of us, was a great encyclopedia, if I may, full of insights on the recent history of cryptography. I believe this presentation, well, shows ever-present challenges, but also the ones that will arise throughout time. It feels like you said, well, it's a tug of war. And quite organic, if I may, in this mindset of investigation forces or law enforcement, and that technology area and civil society that is keen to guarantee rights that, well, go into tension throughout the history. So it's quite organic. It's something that ever present. And when we talk about hacking as a sort of a symptom of a new challenge that deviates from cryptography, but still goes through the same issues. Many people said that government hacking would be a solution, as it is a surveillance power. Nevertheless, it runs into structural risk to rights and the security in connected ecosystems, just like a backdoor would offer. So I believe the same keys of interpretation of those policies of backdoor, well, they apply to document tracking, but not only government tracking, but also other solutions such as client-side scanning. And it's interesting how you brought information that would be, well, will be addressed by the other two panels, this next one in the morning, also the one in the afternoon. So it is a kickoff, a great starting point, a phenomenal one for us to develop the seminar around the issues that the audience brings us. And I understand that you won't be able to be with us for the rest of the panel, but I am certain there will be many questions, and we'll forward them to you for you to keep talking to us. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Andre. Thanks, everyone.